Hey guys, in this video, we'll quickly go over the Nodewar changes and talk about the pros and cons along with different ways to help make the new Nodewar system better. Nodewars is probably one of my favorite content in Black Desert Online, and it's disappointing to see that the new system has had quite a negative response from the community, with a lot of players not really finding Nodewars as fun. I think Nodewars are still okay, but have some pretty major issues that should be fixed. It is important to know the history of Nodewars and what has changed to see why the community has had such a negative response on the new Nodewar system. To understand why PA has made this Nodewar change, we have to look back and understand the old Nodewar system and its issues. In the previous system, you would choose a node that is available on that day to pre-place a fort with its structures. During the Node War, guilds fight to destroy other guilds' fort, and the last fort standing would win the node. PA has over time slowly reduced the amount of nodes available per day, with the latest iteration only having maybe 5 to 6 nodes and up to 9 to 10 nodes a day if you include tier 1 and tier 2 nodes. If you look back a long while ago, you can have maybe 20 different nodes per day. According to PA, the reason they shrunk node amounts down so much is because there has been so many empty nodes and snipe guilds that don't foster PvP. So they wanted to force guilds to place on the same nodes. That much is fair, however, even with the latest iteration having very little node count, if you didn't script a node war beforehand with different guilds, or place on a node that is a common fight night, it was still very easy to snipe a node, or have a very imbalanced fight. On top of that, if you've ever done node war politics in BDO, it is a very unpleasant experience to say the least, and it can take multiple hours a day, basically being a second job. Again, ask any player who has done politicking for Node Wars, and I'm sure most of them would say that they've hated it. There are also horror stories that you hear from Korean BDO servers where not only is the fight scripted, but the winner of that fight is predetermined beforehand. That is pretty crazy, and I can't see how that can be fun for anyone, especially after countless hours of Node War politicking. Because of all that, PA wanted to make a new system where you didn't have to do anything outside of the Node War in any third-party software to get a good Node War. And PA changed how you queue into Node Wars. There are only 3 different places you can queue for, separated by gear cap and player cap. After lock-in, you get randomly placed into 2 regions based on what you queued for. With the new queue system, you no longer have to do pre-war politics, nor do you have to place and build your own fort beforehand. Again, there are many issues with the new Node War system, but I think some parts are done in good faith and we should support them. Now that we've gone over some of the good things that have come from the changes for queuing into Node Wars, we have to look at the new mechanics fighting in the Node Wars themselves. Because you no longer have a base, you spawn in a random town and have to go and capture a fort with a random timer on it. 1 fort spawns per 2 guilds on that region, and one of the forts may have a mystery timer that doesn't show. Once the timer runs out, the guild that owns the fort gets a win, and the other guilds need to either get another fort or they will lose if there are no longer any forts on the region. This does cause many problems that we'll go over in the next section. However, there still is a possibility of fun in the new system. One of my favorite wars so far has been a war where we queued against 5 other pretty competent guilds, and there were 3 forts on that region. 2 of the forts that had timers both had 10-minute timers, so they disappeared really fast. The last remaining fort was the mystery fort, and that lasted for almost an entire hour, where 4 guilds constantly pushed the same fort without a shown timer and had a pretty good fight. However, with that nice reminiscence of a fun fight, let's get to the main portion of the video where we talk about the issues of the new Node War systems and ways in which we can fix them. The big, overarching issue in the new Node War system is that it has many core mechanics that do not foster player versus player content. This can be quite an issue since Node Wars is meant to be for PvP. In my opinion, there are 3 core mechanics that do not foster PvP, and we will now go over what those issues are and why they don't foster PvP. The first issue is going to be the downtime from spawning into the Node Wars. Since there's no longer a fort to spawn at, you teleport to a random town at the beginning of Node War. Some of these towns can be okay, but some can also be super far away, like spawning in Arahaza in the Valencia node. Even if you get a decent spawn, the first 1 to 2 minutes of the Nodewar at minimum is going to be riding from the town as a group to get to the fort. That by itself wouldn't be too bad, but we have to look at when the PvP actually starts. If you don't get the fort early, you need to wait for your first flag. Sieging a base without a flag can be pretty annoying if it's not right next to a town, as every time your ball wipes, you need to spend 1 to 2 minutes regrouping from town spawn. Because of this, you need to find a place to build a flag factory, wait for the flag factory to go up, and then wait 3 minutes for it to produce its first flag. You also need to find a spot to actually place the flag, 2 flame towers, and a huacha. With all of that, you need around 6 to 7 minutes to actually start sieging and doing PvP to get to a base. Even if you were the guild that captured the fort early, most guilds won't attack you until they get their flag, flame towers, and huacha set up, so either way you aren't getting PvP. Since Nodewars at maximum are 60 minutes now, that is more than 10% of the time just setting up. The crazy thing is that most forts end around 30 to 40 minutes, so the setup time can take up to 33% of the entire Nodewar. Of course, in the first 6 to 7 minutes, you can get some rat kills and some small skirmishes, but it isn't really going to be very high quality of PvP. With PA making Nodewars more of an arcade, queue in and fight system, the extensive downtime can be really annoying and counterintuitive. While we're on the point of setting up a flag factory, the mechanics of the flag factory forces at least one player to no longer be able to do player versus player content. Again, this does not foster PvP. Since flag factories can be placed anywhere on the map, as you don't spawn with a fort anymore, the most efficient thing to do is to place the flag factory in some random corner where no one will go, so it can continuously generate flags. You don't need to put the flag factory near your flag or near your FT huacha, since this can make it an easy target to kill and you'll lose flag spawning potential. However, every 3 minutes, one player needs to go to get the flag in some random corner of the map, and if you place an elephant nursery here too, every 5 minutes they'll need to make an elephant. It really is just weird and boring content that doesn't need to be in the game. The fix we'll suggest later will help both the downtime at the beginning of Nodewars and the flag factory issue. Moving on to the second biggest issue that doesn't foster PvP, is that there are too many forts that spawn at the same time. One fort spawns for every 2 guilds on the region. This issue is exacerbated if there are a lot of snipe guilds, but is still a problem even without them. If at the beginning of the war, all stronger guilds get their own fort, there really is no point in fighting after that. If the only guilds without a fort, which is half of the guilds that place in that region, are snipe guilds or weaker guilds, they have basically no chance of getting a fort unless they team up with the other guilds. Even if all guilds are relatively equal, if the fort with timers on them have similar times, it will only really be a 1v1 for a fort, which the defending guild will have a huge advantage, making the attacking guild try to go for a weaker guild's fort instead of a guild that's an even fight. The new system just doesn't really foster fighting a same strength guild when you can just punch down and take your own fort from a weaker guild. Again, if all the stronger guilds just take their own fort, the Nodewar basically just ends. This leads us onto the next issue, which is that there's no point in getting a fort until the last second when the timer runs out. The third issue, which is probably the biggest issue in terms of not fostering PvP, is that there's no point in holding a fort until the timer runs out. For 99% of the war, there is no point in capturing the fort, since only the guild that holds the fort when the timer runs out wins the node. You get nothing for holding the fort at any other point in the Nodewar. You do get a loser's consolation prize if you've captured a fort at any point of the Nodewar, but that's not really what guilds are looking for. What this issue creates is that most guilds will just go to the shortest timer fort, slowly chip away at it with cannons or huachas, and at the last 1 to 2 minutes of the fort timer, push it and capture the fort. If you capture the fort too early, other guilds can then push the fort that you captured before the time runs out and you'll end up losing the fort. This makes it so that only the last 2 to 3 minutes of a fort expiring matters, and there's really no point to even hold the fort beforehand unless it's an even 1v1. If it is an even 1v1, there can be a lot of advantages to holding the fort early, but that doesn't really happen as much considering there are only 3 regions, and every guild on your region sees the timer running out and go for that fort. This is super anti-fun, and it makes most of the Nodewars basically meaningless, since you only need to capture the fort at the last second. So, with all these 3 issues underlined that don't foster PvP, this is how Node Wars have been playing out. This example will use 6 guilds on Node, but it's basically the same even if there were more. At the beginning of Node War, the strongest guild on the node goes for the Mystery Timer Fort. It gives the biggest payout, so it just makes sense. Every other guild will try to get the lowest timer fort. If you don't get the fort at the beginning, you'll wait for around 6 to 7 minutes to set up your flags, hwachas, cannons, flame towers to begin chipping away at the fort. If you did capture the fort, you'll still wait 6 to 7 minutes building your structures and waiting for the enemies to set up their structures and cannons. Assuming the strongest guild stays on their mystery fort, and a guild went for a higher timer fort and stays on that, the other 4 guilds will be 3v1ing for the lowest timer fort. What happens is that the guild holding the fort is getting 3v1'd with 3 hwachas and cannons pelting their base, so they really can't do anything but spawn bomb. Meanwhile, the other guilds have no reason to do anything but defend their flags and cannons, since until the last 1 to 2 minutes of a fort timer, there's no reason to full push. The attacking guilds just wait for the defending players to die, slowly chip the fort, and when the defenders respawn, fall back to defend their hwacha, cannons, and flags. The defending guild can't really even push up to the enemy flag since they constantly have 3 guilds on them. Once the timer goes down to 1 to 2 minutes, all guilds will push in, and whatever guild holds the fort when the timer ends wins. All remaining guilds then move on to the next lowest timer fort and rinse and repeat until the Node War ends. The only small difference is the mystery fort, but usually a higher end siege guild will drop on cap nodes and most guilds won't have a chance of fighting them for it. The only time they get a fight is if the mystery fort is the last remaining fort, and at that point they are getting 1v3'd, which isn't even fun. It just goes back to the coin flipping on a 1v3 that whatever guild holds the fort when the timer ends wins. The guild holding the mystery fort can run around while the other forts are still up to kill players, but at that point you are PvPing for no reason just to kill players who are trying to get a fort. The win condition of a node war is no longer aligned with PvP. All in all, due to these mechanics, you spend 99% of the node war either 1. AFK defending the fort, 2. Spawn bombing against multiple guilds cannoning and hwachaing you, 3. Doing cannon, hwacha, and flag defense, and 4. PvEing a fort by trying to do as much damage to it as possible in the last 1 to 2 minutes of the timer. The 3 mechanics we mentioned earlier that do not foster PvP end up with a node war system that doesn't foster PvP. You end up doing really boring things for most of the node war. However, as I mentioned earlier, I did manage to have fun in one of these wars, and why is that? The reason is because that node war, due to the random nature of fort timers, solved 2 of the 3 issues. The 2 other nodes on fort only lasted for 10 minutes, so they quickly disappeared along with 2 random guilds. The only remaining fort was the mystery timer fort that 4 guilds had to fight over. This made it so the second issue of there being too many forts wasn't an issue anymore, since there was only 1 fort left. The third issue, where guilds only wait for the timer to run out to push, wasn't an issue since it was a mystery timer fort. We didn't know when the fort would expire. With 2 issues solved, it was a pretty fun node war. With that being said, since we do know that it is possible to have fun in the new node war system, we just have to make a little bit of changes. Moving on to the next portion of this video, we're going to go over some possible fixes for the new node war system. We'll go over a fix for the 3 issues we underlined earlier, but I wanted to suggest a quick fix that can be done in under an hour and pushed to live servers in almost a day. The other fixes will likely take a couple weeks to implement, so I just wanted to make a quick suggestion at the beginning to help players stay engaged until the better fixes come. The fastest fix is to remove the shown timer on forts so guilds don't know when a fort is about to expire. This makes guilds want to capture and hold forts since at any moment they can expire and the guild that holds it wins. This is to counter the current meta where you don't need to hold the fort until the very last second. Now of course, this doesn't solve the issue of there being too many forts and the starting downtime, but this is just a super quick patch that can help things for the time being. Now we'll move on to the fixes that can specifically help the 3 issues we mentioned earlier that don't foster PvP. The first issue is that there is too much downtime at the beginning of war. To fix this, we can simply remove flag factories from existence. Every guild can start with a flag at the beginning of Node War and be able to claim a flag in their guild menu maybe every 3 to 5 minutes. This removes the boring wait time at the beginning, waiting for the first flag to spawn, and also lets the player AFK sitting at the flag factory play the game. We can also make nodes and town spawns closer to each other to help the beginning 1 to 2 minutes of war not be so boring. Still, there will be some downtime waiting for watches and flame towers, but a majority of the boring beginning will be removed if we can start with a flag in pocket. Since there's no flag factory, guilds can just claim the flag from the new Nodewar menu or somewhere in the guild page. It can also just be a guild skill that has a 3-minute timer, so guilds can no longer pocket flags, but they'll have one every 3 minutes. Moving on, the second issue is that there are way too many forts that spawn at the same time. To fix this issue, we can still have a fort spawn for every 2 guilds, but we can stagger their spawn time. If there are 6 guilds on a node, we can have one fort spawn in the first 20 minutes, a second fort spawn after that fort expires, and the final fort spawn after the second fort expires. That way, Nodewars are still 1 hour max, but the staggered spawn lets all guilds participate in a fight throughout the entire Node War, instead of just standing AFK defending a fort. If there are 8 guilds on node, we can just have 1 fort spawn in the first third, 1 fort spawn in the second third, and 2 forts spawn in the final third. If there are 12 guilds on node, it can just be 2 forts spawn at the same time, and so on. And this can cause a bit of chaos, but you still want to have multiple guilds fight for the same fort, and will make a little bit more sense when we get to the third fix. Moving on, the third issue is that there's no point to push a fort until the last second of the timer. To fix this, there are 2 possible solutions. One of the more popular ones is to have Node Wars be more of a control point style of win condition, where the guild who holds the fort for the longest amount of time is the guild that gets the win rewards. If we don't do the second fix where forts spawn staggered, this can make Node Wars boring, as once a guild holds a fort for more than 51% of the time, it becomes an auto win and there's no longer a point to fight for that fort. However, if we stagger the spawns, there will always be multiple guilds fighting for the same fort, which lowers the chance of one guild holding it for more than half of the time immediately. Once the fort despawns, we can have the winner of that fort either be taken away from the node and given win rewards, which is what it's like now, or have them stay and their points carry over to the new fort that people are fighting over. In this case, the winner of the node is the guild that has the highest accrued points at the end of the node war, and other rewards are given based on the total points like second and third place. The second option lets guilds fight in the Node War for the entire hour rather than the winner get taken away and have less PvP. However, this can cause the issue where the strongest guild just stomps everyone the entire 1 hour. The second possible fix for the third issue is to have forts be based on the damage done to them rather than any guild holding the fort. This makes it so that no guild can capture and spawn on fort, rather the win condition is just to continuously do damage to the fort, and the guild with the most damage done gets the rewards. This makes it so that guilds are never really defending a fort and spawn bombing from it, rather every guild is always attacking a fort that has infinite health and is just a damage sponge. The same rules apply from the previous solution where when the fort ends, it can either take out the guild that wins, or they can continue on with their points and the rewards are distributed at the end of Node War. PA will just have to decide which system they like better. An additional point that I wanted to say here is that because of snipe guilds, all of these fixes can become irrelevant. If you spawn on a region as one guild and the other guild is just a snipe, you'll have no PvP and basically be forced to stay there for an entire hour. I've also heard from down the grapevine that there is a snipe coalition forming that basically wants to spam drop on one region, and it's guaranteed that at least half the guilds will have a fort without actually having to PvP. Now, I don't really mind if PA makes a 4th region where it's only snipes that can place there, and that those guilds get rewards 50% of the time. However, if snipes do place on regions where there's actual PvP going on, it can really ruin it for those guilds involved. PA needs to find some way to punish snipe guilds that go beyond a temp ban from placing on nodes. Snipe guilds don't really even want to place on nodes, they just want the rewards, so temp banning them doesn't do anything. Banning snipe guilds does require a little more hands-on moderation, and I really don't know if PA is willing to do that. Either way though, they should find some solution to this. Enough about snipe guilds, but on to the conclusion. With all these 3 issues fixed that don't foster player versus player content, we're left with the benefits of the new Node War system not having as much snipes, politics, and forcing guilds to fight over an objective, while also having it foster fun PvP that isn't super boring or tedious. With that being said, I do believe that PA released the new system in good faith, trying to fix some of the issues that they have in the Korean server, and I do think that it's a good start. However, they will need time to listen to player feedback and start implementing new changes. Either way, I think it's a good idea to have a positive mindset when talking about the new Nodewar system, since PA, much like everyone else, is not going to respond well to criticism, especially if it's in a very negative tone. Even if they did respond well, it's still better for most people to be less angry and frustrated most of the time, so having a positive mindset can help with this. Either way though, those are my initial suggestions for the new Nodewar system. If you have any ideas, there are a bunch of different community posts and videos about this system, so feel free to either make your own suggestions or comment and support those that you agree with. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all next time.